Have you ever wondered why Germany didn't win the First World War? We ask a historian for the top 5 reasons that sealed Germany's fate.
So maybe, the best would have been to avoid that from happening. But that is true for all nations in 1914. Then the key argument which I always make is keep the Americans out. Okay, the Americans delivered war material to Britain and France, and this is also tough nut, tough pill to swallow, that you say our boys die on the battlefield in France because Americans deliver ammunition. Does not go well. Basically, they are helping our enemies in a massive way. But still, it would have been in the German interest to accept that, because you cannot change this, and trying to change that makes no sense. So avoiding the Americans to come in, then the entire thing would have gone differently. I don't know how differently, but there is a big likelihood that Germany would not have lost the war. There would have been a kind of compromise piece. If that would have made Europe a better place or not, who knows? It's counterfactual history. And we don't have to debate that, even if I think probably it would have been a better place. But this is open. And basically, we can leave it here, because I could not now make also other examples of things going wrong, but the 2 central points are already made. Not starting the war, and if the war started, at least keeping the Americans out. Of course, we could make a third point, keep the English out. But that is already a very tough one, because even without Belgium, it may have been that at some point Britain enters the war to prevent the European balance being completely changed in German favor, so that they would have intervened to help the French and the Russians.
Just the last 2 questions, and they're a little bit more light-hearted than perhaps what we've been discussing. But if you could have a conversation with any figure from the First World War, or even prior, obviously from the area that you studied, who would it be and what would you ask them?
Well, I have the strong feeling that if I were meeting anybody from, for example, from the German leadership in the First World War, it would probably be a conversation about between 2 deaf-mute people, because whatever I would say, I would probably say, well, don't do that, and don't do that. And I think they would not listen to me. And because they were acting and they thought they have good reasons. I would be interested, for example, to speak with Erich von Falkenhayn, because I wrote a biography on him. And I would be curious to see if he is exactly as I imagined him. That would be a professional interest. I would be interested to see Leo Trotsky, the Russian politician who was head in Brest-Litovsk, who was an extremely smart and charismatic individual, but also somebody, a mass murderer. So we are talking about very bad people here. And there are many other interesting people. For example, the British pacifist Bertrand Russell would be interesting to meet. It would be very interesting to meet, for example, Lloyd George, who I think was in many aspects fascinating man. And I could make a long list. What would I discuss with them? It's on the individuals.
That's a fair answer. And I guess it also depends on what drink that you're sharing with them as well, right? That will also influence the conversation. My last question then is, during your research, was there any kind of fact or piece of trivia that you discovered that you just didn't expect? Was there something that you researched that you came across and you had to almost double or triple check to make sure it was true because of how perhaps surprising it may have been?
Okay, I make things like that happen. And I make one example, which is a little bit outside of my field of political and military history. Because at some point I stumbled over the fact that, in the First World War, they invented poisonous gas. And they started to use that from 1915 onwards. And at some point, they made, after the war, they made tests with poisonous gas, more precisely with something which was called mustard gas or lost. And they found out that this can be used as an anti-cancer treatment. And if you are unlucky and you have cancer now, there is a so-called chemotherapy. And the chemotherapy is built on similar and comparable material as poisonous gas, this particular poisonous gas in the First World War.
Wow. Okay, I never knew that. I just want to double check. I've got through all of the questions that I wanted to ask you. Is there anything that you think is worth mentioning or anything that you think we've missed over that you just want to kind of say before we wrap up?
Yeah. Amar, I wrote this book, and this book has 550 pages. Of course, if we cover every aspect, then we probably need a week or so. And I think for 1 hour, we spoke already about a lot.
And that's the end of another intriguing podcast episode. I hope you enjoyed listening to it as much as I enjoyed creating this podcast. If you're passionate about the work I'm doing and want to support it, consider becoming a paid YouTube member to unlock some cool features or join our Patreon community. You can find the links in the description below. Thanks again for tuning in, and I'll hopefully see you in the next video. Bye!